Welcome to today's Crosspoint Devotion. As you're watching today's devotion, I will have finished, by the time you see this, a long 20-part series on the Sermon on the Mount. And this most recent Sunday, right before I'm recording this particular video, I was preaching from Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14. I want to read those for you today. And this is what it says: "Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who go through it. How narrow is the gate and difficult the road that leads to life, and few find it." What I think this passage is reminding us of is that Jesus is saying all of us are going to choose a path in life. Some of us are going to choose the narrow path. That is, that we're going to put our faith in Jesus, we're going to follow Him, and it's going to be a narrow path that won't always look the best on the front end, but in the end, it's going to lead to life. But there are many people who are going to follow the wide path. Well, this was the theme of last week's sermon, and so if you want to go back and watch that, you can find it on Facebook, and we'd love for you to do that. But after the service, someone came up to me and said, "I really enjoyed the sermon, but I wish you would have had time to talk about some of the things on the wide path that are so attractive." So I decided to do today's devotion as a follow-up to the Sermon on the Mount series, which we called Flip the Script. And what I want to focus on for just a few moments is what are some of the things on the wide path that leads to destruction that are so attractive? And I came up with a small list that I'd like to share with you in today's devotion. One of the things that I think might be very appealing on the wide path is conformity. If we get on the wide path, then we're probably going to look like most of the other people. Jesus himself said that the path that leads to destruction is really wide. There are a lot of people on it, and very few people find this other path that is going to lead to life, the path that would lead to putting faith in Him. And so when we walk the wide path, we're actually mixing in with other people, and we conform to what they're doing, and so we don't stand out. We don't have to make a difference in society. We just kind of follow what society's already doing, and I think that's one of the attractive pieces of the wide path. Another thing that I wrote down is that the wide path is very entertaining. For example, right now in our culture, gambling is gaining in its popularity. There's a recent discussion among the NCAA that is going to possibly allow college athletes to bet on professional games for the very first time. And that lets us know that gambling's growing in its entertainment value in our society, because in the past, college athletes were never allowed to bet on any games, whether it was college games or professional games. But it looks like if this new legislation passes, that college athletes can now gamble on professional sports, even though they're playing as athletes themselves. And that shows us that gambling is growing in its entertainment value. And maybe that's a part of the wide road appeal. The attractiveness of it is it's very entertaining. I also think that when you walk the wide path, it's pleasurable. The other thing that's growing in popularity, and it's not just among men, it's also growing among women, is pornography. We are bringing pleasure to ourselves by looking at images of others, and so therefore, I think that the wide path might be filled with personal pleasure, and that's why it's so attractive. Another thing that I wrote in my list is it gives us independence. You see, when you get on the narrow path and you follow Jesus, then you've got to surrender daily to Him and follow Him in obedience. But when you get on the wide path, you're independent. You can do whatever you want. The path is wide. It looks like what's ahead is going to be a lot of fun, and so you get to choose your path and do what you want. So independence is another reason that the wide road is very attractive. But then I came across a few other things that I wanted to share with you, and that would be this: cultural Christianity is on the wide path. You see, these other things I've talked about up to this point have probably been more affiliated with people who are outside the faith, people who don't go to church, people who are not really interested in the things of God. But I think that the wide path might also include some people that have said in their own minds, "I'm a believer," but the reality is they're really only doing it for cultural reasons. They show up at church on Sundays because it's expected in their community, or they go to church because it's good for their business investments in the local community, or it's just something they grew up doing because their grandmother taught them how to do it, their parents went to church, and so they are into cultural Christianity. They're really not following Christ, but they want to kind of have a talk like they are. And I think that's on the wide path. And then the final one that I would give to you today to consider, the wide path is very appealing because it allows us to be an idol for ourselves. We go all the way back to Genesis, and that's what the serpent said to Eve at the very beginning. If you eat this fruit, you can be like God. And so Eve took the fruit and ate of it. Then she gave it to Adam, and he ate, and they both sinned and disobeyed God's one single command. And I think that maybe the wide path has a lot of appeal because it tells us you can be a God yourself. You don't have to listen to the Lord God. You don't have to live in obedience to Jesus Christ. You don't have to follow the promptings of the Spirit. You just get to do what you want to do. And whenever we get to do what we want to do, we become an idol. We make ourselves a God. And so that may be some of the reasons why the wide path is so appealing. But don't forget, if you're watching this and you're on the wide path, Jesus himself said that the wide path ends in destruction. Let me read again, verse 13. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road broad that leads to destruction, and there are many who go through it. I don't want you to walk down this wide path, as appealing as it is, as attractive as it is. I don't want you to walk down that path because the end is going to end up in destruction. What I'd like for you to do today is know that Jesus came to this earth. He is God in the flesh. He died on the cross for your sin and for mine. He was buried and resurrected on the third day to defeat sin and death. And following him is the narrow path, but it is the path that leads to life. Listen to verse 14. How narrow is the gate and difficult the road that leads to life, and few find it. Few people will understand, but Jesus is the only way. He said it one time in John 14:6. I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. I hope today you have chosen Jesus and found the narrow path, because his path is the only path that leads to life, the abundant life, and I want you to have that. Well, I hope this will give you some food for thought, and we hope you'll come back and join us for the next Crosspoint Devotion.